No, it says again that it is impossible to share my screen.
Okay, I allowed from here for everyone to be able to share their screen. So I think there might be
Am
some
I
problems.
allowed to share my screen?
Yes,
Am I
yes, I
allowed?
have. From my end, I have allowed everyone. Like I changed the setting and I made it a general setting. So, if,
Abhishek,
yes, sir.
if you have the PPT with you, then you
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
yourself
Yes,
can
sir. I
present
do. I do.
that way. That would be better.
Yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir.
you can coordinate and
Yes, sir.
okay.
Hi, Marius.
All right. I'll
Mr.
try to.
Frascolla, nice to see you. I'm looking forward to your lecture very much.
Oh, I hope that I will not. No,
All right, sir.
it
I'll
says
try
it
to
says
share
again
it.
that I cannot I cannot share the. Okay, it's the same. I I I will try to give my talk without
No,
the
sir.
slide.
I can share it from my end, and then
Oh,
I can.
if you can, but
Yes, yes. I
I
can. I can. I'll just do it.
okay, but can I see the slides if you use
I,
the file that the PowerPoint file that I sent you?
yes, I'm just sharing it, and you. Uh,
Okay, I see it. Good. Do you see the slide now?
yeah, I am sharing from my end. Can if everyone can see it, then it should be fine. And
Okay. So if I say, please show slide 2, you have to, because
yes, I'll have to.
okay,
I'll
I
work
think
with
that
you.
I am not allowed to change the slides on the screen. I
Uh,
think because if I click on the slide,
yes, yes. I will
nothing
be changing. I
nothing
will.
happens.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I will be changing. I will be changing the slides for
Okay,
you.
for me. Okay,
Yes.
okay. Uh,
All right.
this is the first one. Okay, if you want, we can start.
Yeah. Just give me a minute. I'll just.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all on this centenary lecture series on Tractators. For today's lecture, Professor Frascolla will be speaking on the topic, Do Tractarian Objects Exist in Every Possible World? Professor Frascolla is a professor of philosophy of language in the Department of Humanities, University of Naples, Italy. And Professor R.C. Pradhan will be chairing this session. And I welcome you all. Over to you, Professor Frascolla.
Pardon?
You can start the talk.
I
Yes.
didn't hear. Sorry.
Was I not audible? Hello.
Okay, now yes, I hear
Yes,
now.
you can start. You can start your
Okay, thank
lecture.
you very much. Okay, let me start by warmly thanking again Professor Panda for inviting me to participate in the lecture series on Wittgenstein's Tractatus on the centenary of its publication. I don't know how much time I have available for my talk. I think 1 hour is or something
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
something less than 1 hour.
You can have
Okay.
1 hour.
Okay, I think that it is enough. Well, the question raised in the title of my talk, that is as you can see, do Tractarian objects exist in every possible world? Um, this title can be reframed uh, in the following terms, which are definitely more familiar to Wittgenstein's scholars. That is, the question can be reframed as follows: how is the status of substantiality of Tractarian objects to be understood? My talk deals with this old question. In my opinion, proposition 2.013 of the Tractatus that you can read in slide 2, uh, proposition 2.013, even though apparently of minor importance, plays, in my opinion, a key role to find a plausible answer to the above question. As you can see, proposition 2.013 runs as follows. Each thing is, as it were, in a space of possible states of affairs. This space I can imagine empty, but I cannot imagine the thing without the space. Now, uh, to clarify the true import of section 2.013, it is expedient to present a simplified model of how logical space, uh, that is, the set of all logical places or states of affairs, and the set of all possible total configurations of reality, that is, the set of all uh, possible combinations of the obtaining and non-obtaining of states of affairs, are generated out of objects. Here, I take for granted that the Tractatus authorizes talk about possible worlds, understood as possible total configurations of the obtaining and non-obtaining of states of affairs. And I take this for granted, although only in section 2.022 Wittgenstein speaks of a world imagined as different from the actual world, and thus this with the aim to maintain that, however different such a world might be from the actual one, it must share a form with the latter. Well, let us suppose that in my simplified model of logical space, let us suppose then that each object, that there are four objects in the domain of the model that I call O1, O2, O3, and O4. Each object is essentially characterized by its combinatorial potential, that is, by the totality of its possible occurrences in states of affairs. I am quoting from TLP 2.0123. The quotation is the totality of its possible occurrences in states of affairs. Every one of these possibilities must be part of the nature of the object. Let us suppose then that each object can combine with only one object at a time, and specifically suppose that the object O1 can combine both with the object O2 and with the object O3, that the object O2, in addition to the object O1, can combine with the object O3 as well, that the object O3 can combine with the object O1, the object O2, and the object O4. Therefore, the object O4 can combine only with the object O3. We can extensionally represent an admissible combination of objects, that is, a state of affairs of our model, by means of the set of objects which are its components. That is, I am adopting a purely extensional treatment of states of affairs. Now, this purely extensional treatment of states of affairs has the undeniable advantage of enabling us to consider any two states of affairs with the same components as identical. It is worth noting, however, that Wittgenstein would not have deemed such a treatment as viable, because the aspect of the concatenation of objects in a state of affairs gets lost through the extensional treatment, or the set theoretical treatment of states of affairs. In other words, as a consequence of that treatment, the state of affairs reduces to an amorphous totality, whose elements are not related to one another in a determinate way, mirroring the way in which their names are related to one another in the proposition representing the state of affairs. Nonetheless, in my opinion, the extensionalization of states of affairs is quite innocuous, given the objective pursued here, and provides a very useful means for penetrating the problem at issue. By adopting the extensional point of view, we have the following list of the states of affairs of our model. You can see the slide where there are, please, the slide number 3 is, okay. You can see that there is a list of 4 states of affairs, S1, S2, S3, S4, and each one of them is represented extensionally. That is, it is presented and conceived of as a set of objects. This is the way in which I understand the extensional treatment of states of affairs. And adopting the extensional point of view, we have the list of states of affairs that you can see, and we can represent, we can say that S1, S2, S3, and S4, the 4 states of affairs of our model, ontological model, are the logical places forming the logical space of our model. And the latter, that is the logical space of our model, can be extensionally represented by means of the set that I call LS, logical space. And you can see that the set logical space, the elements of the set logical space, are exactly the 4 states of affairs of our model, that is, the 4 logical places which constitute the logical space. Well, now we can make another a further step in the presentation of this simplified model of the Tractatus ontology. All the possible combinations of the obtaining and non-obtaining of the 4 states of affairs which form the logical space, that is, all the possible total configurations of reality are generated by applying three fundamental logic-ontological principles. First, the principle of excluded middle, according to which, for any given state of affairs of our logical space, either it obtains or it does not obtain. This is the first principle. Second principle is the principle of non-contradiction, according to which no state of affairs can be both obtaining and non-obtaining. The third fundamental principle is the principle of logical independence of states of affairs, the Tractatus 2.6 and 2.062, according to which the obtaining or non-obtaining of one state of affairs does not entail the obtaining or non-obtaining of any other state of affairs. Now, to accept the three principles just mentioned is tantamount to considering all the combinations of the obtaining and non-obtaining of the four states of affairs of our model as conceivable. That is, is tantamount to considering all the possible assignments, either of obtaining or of non-obtaining, to each one of the four states of affairs as admissible. That is, to consider all the possible assignments as admissible. Obviously, the number of such assignments is 16 in our model, and in the table of slide contained in slide 4, you have you see that each row of the table represents one of the 16 possible total configuration of reality. Obviously, the actual configuration is necessarily one of them, of the 16 possible total configurations of reality listed here in the slide. I can add that an extensional representation of the totality of the possible total configuration of reality can be easily achieved by resorting to the power set of the set theoretical correlate of logical space. This is to the power set of the set LS of logical space, the function that associates the subset of logical space whose elements are all and only the states of affairs obtaining in the configuration CI, which associates the subset to the configuration of reality CI, is a one-to-one correspondence between the set of all the possible total configurations of reality and the power set of logical space. Well, this is the set theoretical model that I adopt to present the interpretation of proposition 2.013, on which I will focus from now onwards. But before going into the interpretation of section 2.013, there are two preliminary questions which need to be answered. The first is the following question. What is the space in which an object is metaphorically placed? And the second question is, why cannot an object be thought of without that space? That is, why cannot an object be conceived of without that space? Because this is the first thing that we find in section 2.013, where Wittgenstein says that I cannot imagine the thing without the space. But first of all, what is the space in which an object is metaphorically placed, according to Wittgenstein, to section 2, proposition 2.013 of the Tractatus? By resorting to our simplified model, the answer to this question is straightforward. The space where an object OI is metaphorically OI, that is O1 or 2 or 3 or 4, because we have 4 objects in our model, and I use OI for referring generically to one of them, is metaphorically placed. The space where an object OI is metaphorically placed is the totality of the logical places which are essentially related to it. This is a metaphor, but out of metaphor, the space where an object OI is placed is the totality of the states of affairs which the object OI is a component of. The extensional representation is still helpful here. As you can see in slide 5, take for instance the object O1 of our model. By an examination of the set logical space, we can conclude that the space where the object is, O1 is placed is represented by the following subset of logical space. The subset whose elements are the set which contain O1 and O2 as its elements, and the set which contains O1 and O3 as its elements. So this subset of logical space represents the space where the object O1 is placed, because the elements of these sets are precisely the 2 states of affairs which the object O1 is a component of. This set extensionally represents the combinatorial potential of the object O1, because represents all the states of affairs which O1 is a component of. The combinatorial potential of an object identifies it essentially, that is, identifies the object essentially, in the sense that, first, in general, an object is by its nature a component of states of affairs, an entity that cannot occur in isolation in any possible configuration of reality. And second, which states of affairs an object is a component of belongs to its nature as well. As our table clearly shows, each possible total configuration of reality, the actual configuration included, is characterized by the states of affairs obtaining in it and by those non-obtaining in it. But in no possible world, objects occur in isolation. This can be viewed as a sort of context principle holding at the ontological level. In virtue of the fundamental workings of picture theory, a symmetrical situation holds at the level of our thinking and speaking of objects, and a fortiori of our knowing them. Quotation from TLP 20121. Just as we are quite unable to imagine, denken is the German word, spatial objects outside space or temporal objects outside time, so too there is no object that we can imagine, denken, excluded from the possibility of combining with others. And then in TLP 2.0123 we find Wittgenstein saying, if I know an object, I also know all its possible occurrences in states of affairs. To take stock, the space where an object OI is placed is essentially associated to it, and one cannot imagine, denken, an object OI without the space in which it is placed, that is, without the totality of the states of affairs, which it is that is, the object is a component of. Here, it is of the utmost importance to bear in mind that states of affairs are possible, not necessarily actual combinations of objects, and that, accordingly, the space of states of affairs where an object is placed belongs to the a priori realm of logic, not to the reality of the world. Well, we have finally reached a position from which, in my opinion, from which an answer can be given to our main question. That is, what does Wittgenstein mean when, in section 2.013, he says that although one cannot imagine an object without the space where it is placed, one can imagine that space as empty nonetheless? What I think that now we are in a position from which we can find an answer to the above question. That is, what does Wittgenstein mean when he says that we can imagine the space where an object is placed as empty, even though we cannot imagine the object without its space? I think that now all the elements to find an answer are available to us. And I think that the answer to the above question, to which my talk is devoted, opens new and interesting perspectives on the nature of objects, and in particular on their status as the substance of the world. Now, a point is worth noting. Until now, in my presentation of the Tractatus Ontology, I have exploited the extensional correlates of its key notions, we have seen that I have presented a set theoretical correlate for the most important notions of the ontology of the Tractatus, starting from the notion of state of affairs, and then the notion of logical space, and then the notion of possible total configuration of reality. And then a set theoretical correlate of the notion of the space where an object is placed itself. This extensionalization of the key notions of the ontology of the Tractatus, however, can be the source of a harmful misunderstanding in the interpretation of section 2.013, and in particular of the notion of emptiness of the space where an object is placed. If along my interpretive lines that space is conceived of as the set of all the states of affairs which the object is a component of, and this is my suggestion until now, one can easily fall into the trap of attributing to Wittgenstein the idea that it is that very set that can be imagined as empty, that is devoid of elements. I mean that if I take the extensional correlate of the space where an object is placed, and if I construe in theoretical terms the notion of the space where an object is placed, there is one can easily fall into the trap of attributing to Wittgenstein the idea that when he says that space can be empty means that the set of the states of affairs which the object is a component of can be empty. But this would be a gross error, mistake. Or better, this would be absurd, because as we saw earlier, an object is essentially a component of states of affairs, and then it has a combinatorial potential by its very nature, and this in turn amounts to saying that there must be states of affairs which the object is a component of. In other words, the set of the states of affairs which extensionally represent the space where an object is placed must have some element. It cannot be the empty set. So we have better, if we want to reach a plausible interpretation of the notion of emptiness of the space where an object is placed, then the extensional representation of that space is to be abandoned, and the rooms needs to be made to the interpretation of the spatial metaphor of a logical place. What's this interpretation of the spatial metaphor of a logical place? The interpretation I put forward runs as follows, is the following one. A state of affairs as a mere possibility of a fact can be metaphorically described as an empty logical place. A state of affairs being a fact, its obtaining can be metaphorically described as a logical place being occupied by a solid body. To say that a given logical place is empty is a metaphorical way of saying that the state of affairs, which the logical place is out of metaphor, does not obtain. And to say that a given logical place is occupied by a solid body is a metaphorical way of saying that the state of affairs, which the logical place is out of metaphor, does obtain, is a fact. This is the key step in my interpretation. That is, I construe Wittgenstein, metaphorically speaking of a logical place as empty, in a way according to which to say metaphorically that the logical place is empty is tantamount to saying that the state of affairs that the logical place is, with which the logical place can be identified or is identified, is does not obtain. And to say that a logical place is occupied by a solid body is a metaphorical way of saying that the state of affairs, which is identified with the logical place, obtains, is a fact. At this point, a simple and natural further step is needed to get the explanation of Wittgenstein's notion of the emptiness of the space where an object O is placed. Because don't forget that my objective is to give an interpretation of proposition 2.013, that is to explain what Wittgenstein means when he says that the space where an object is placed can be imagined as empty. Well, the further step is that is needed to get the explanation of Wittgenstein's notion of the emptiness of the space where an object is placed is the following. That space, that is the space where an object OI is placed, is empty if and only if all the logical places forming it are empty. According to my reading of the metaphor, this amounts to the following. The space where an object OI is placed is empty if and only if no state of affairs which the object OI is a component of obtains, is a fact. So this is I think that it is slide 5 that is no, there is no slide on that is pertinent or relevant. Okay, now, but the point that I am making can be summed up as follows. We know that the space where an object O is placed is the set of all states of affairs which the object is a component of. If we construe the idea of emptiness of a logical place as a metaphorical way of saying that the state of affairs does not obtain, and we construe the metaphorical way of, and we construe the idea of the that a logical place is occupied by a solid body as a metaphorical way of saying that the state of affairs obtains. We reached the following conclusion, that that if I say that I can imagine the space where an object is placed as empty, I mean that I can imagine that no one of the states of affairs, which are the elements of the space where the object is placed, obtains, is a fact. That this is the state of affairs in question are the state of all the states of affairs which the object is a component of. In conclusion, the non-metaphorical content of section 2.031 can be expressed as follows. The totality of the states of affairs which an object is a component of, understood as its possible combinations with other objects, is essentially associated to the object. Whereas it is impossible to think of an object apart from that totality, it is thinkable that none of those states of affairs obtains, that none of those states of affairs is a fact. Wittgenstein's thesis can be easily illustrated by means of the simplified model which we resorted to before. Take, for instance, the object O1. We know that the space of states of affairs where O1 is placed is extensionally represented by the set whose elements are the states of affairs S1 and S2, that is, by the set whose elements are the set whose elements are which contain as its elements O1 and O2, and the set which contains as its elements the objects O1 and O3. The possible total configurations of reality represented by the rows C11, C14, C15, and C16. Sorry, if you can show slide 4, you can see, I don't know if it is, okay, you can see that in the rows C11, C14, C15, and C16 of the table are all four configurations of reality in which the space where the object O1 is placed turns out to be empty. If you are able to see the 4 lines, 4 rows mentioned, that is C11, C14, C15, and 16, you can see that in each of them, both the states of affairs S1 and S2 do not obtain. So, in each one of the 4 configurations of reality represented by the rows C11, C14, C14, C15, and C16, 16, in all four configurations of reality, S1 and S2 do not obtain, but S1 and S2 are the two logical places which form the logical space where the object O1 is placed, that is, out of metaphor, are the two states of affairs which are the elements of the set which contain the two states of affairs, S1 and S2 as its elements. And both these states of affairs do not obtain in those four total configuration of reality of our model. It is in the logical space where the object O1 is placed is empty if in each one of the four configurations of reality mentioned above. According to my reading, so the point is that we can imagine, denken, a configuration of reality where the logical space, where an object, in particular the object one of our example, is empty. And according to my reading, the conceivability of the total configuration of reality represented by the row C16 of our of the table, that is the total configuration of reality in which no state of affairs of our model obtains, the conceivability of this particular total configuration of reality that represented by the row C16, where no state of affairs of our model obtains, well, that conceivability is equivalent to the conceivability of the emptiness of the whole logical space, that is, of a situation, so to speak, in which the world disappears, and this amounts to recognizing that there are no logical reasons for the world to exist. Well, the thinkability of the emptiness of the space of states of affairs in which an object is placed has a strong impact on the conception of the substantiality of objects. And so we come to the what I think is an important corollary of my interpretation of proposition 2.013, because it involves a corollary which involves the old question of the substantiality of objects, of Tractarian objects, the old question of how that substantiality is to be understood. So now I am trying to spell out the consequences of what I said so far about the conceivability of the emptiness of the logical space where an object is placed. Let us start from the following famous propositions of the Tractatus. Now I quote from Tractatus 2.024 and 2.0271. 2.024 runs as follows: objects are what is unalterable and subsistent. Their configuration is what is changing and unstable. This is Tractatus 2.0271. 2.024 runs as follows: substance is what subsists independently of what is the case. So we start from these famous prepositions, and for my purpose, it is instructive to investigate the reason why any attempt to characterize the substantiality of objects in terms of necessary existence, that is, existence in all possible total configurations of reality, or in all possible worlds, that is, the reason why this attempt is doomed to failure. I think that it is natural to think of the substantiality of objects in terms of necessary existence, where necessary existence is conceived of as existence in all possible worlds. I think that it is a natural reasoning that can lead to this train of thoughts. But I want to show that this idea, that is the idea that substantiality of Tractatian objects can be characterized or defined in terms of necessary existence, where necessary existence in turn is defined as existence in all possible worlds, in every possible world, is doomed to failure. And the reasons of the failure are to be found precisely in the interpretation of proposition 2.013, as we are going to see. The idea that I want to criticize it can be expressed in the following terms. As objects are not isolated ingredients either of the world or of any other possible total configuration of reality, one could be tempted to proceed along the following lines. And here you can see the slide that which is helpful now. One can adopt the following definition of existence of an object O in a possible total configuration of reality C. The definition runs as follows. An object O exists in a possible total configuration of reality C, that is, exists in a possible world, if and only if at least one state of affairs S, which O is a component of, obtains in the configuration C. I think that it is unavoidable to adopt this definition of existence of an object in a possible world, given Wittgenstein's thesis that objects do not occur in isolation, neither in the actual world nor in other possible worlds, that is, neither in the actual world, in reality, or in other possible total configurations of reality, or neither in the actual reality nor in any other possible configuration of reality. And if objects cannot occur in isolation, but only as component of the states of affairs obtaining in a certain, in the actual world or in another possible world, I think that the definition of the existence of an object or in a possible world C in terms of obtaining of at least one state of the first S, which is a component of in that configuration of reality, has no alternative. But if one adopts this interpretation of existence of an object in a possible world, then the consequence, the corollary follows that the substantiality of an object too, that is its independence from what is the case, could be allegedly explained in terms of its existence in the sense of existence established by the above definition in all possible total configuration of reality, that is in all possible worlds. That is the idea that we have a two-step process. The first step consists in defining the notion of existence of an object in a possible world. And the definition is given in the slide that you are seeing now. The second step is to identify substantiality of objects with necessary existence, that is, existence in every possible world, where existence in a world is defined in the notion of existence of an object in a world is defined as you can see in the slide. I think that it is not easy to find an alternative, but this attempt of defining substantiality of objects with necessary existence, that is, existence in every possible world, in the sense explained above, in which an object can exist in a possible world, that is that in that world a state of affairs which the object is a component of is a fact. But this attempt is barred by the conceivability of the emptiness of the space where an object is placed. As we saw above, there are possible total configurations of reality where that space, the space where an object is placed, is empty. And we know that to say that that space is empty is the same as saying that that there are possible total configurations of reality where no state of affairs which the object is a component of obtains is a fact. On the basis of the proposal under critical examination, an object would not exist in those possible total configurations of reality where no state of affairs which the object is a component of obtains. And given the definition of substantiality deriving from that proposal, the definition of substantiality as necessary existence, this would entail the conclusion that no object whatsoever could enjoy the status of substance of the world, because there are possible worlds in which no state of affairs which the object is a component of obtains. But according to the definition proposed, an object exists in a world only if a state of affairs which it is a component of obtains. in that configuration, on that world. And this means that no object could enjoy the status of substance of the world, because for every object there are possible total configurations of the world, that is, possible worlds in which no state of affairs, which the object is a component of, obtains, but this plainly is a reductio ad absurdum of the interpretive proposal at issue. I think that with this argument shows that the attempt to define, to identify substantiality of objects with the necessary existence of objects, where necessary existence means existence in all possible worlds, and where in turn an object exists in a possible world if and only if there is at least one state of affairs which the object is a component of, that obtains in that world. Well, this attempt is doomed to failure for the reasons I tried to show. And my reasons are based on the interpretation of proposition 2.013 of the Tractatus, and in particular on the interpretation of the idea that explicitly Wittgenstein puts forward in that proposition, according to which the space where an object is placed can be imagined empty. It seems to me that no interpretation of the status of substantiality of objects can be deemed as adequate if it is incompatible with the thinkability of those configurations of reality where no state of affairs which a given object is a component of obtains is a fact. The proposition 2.013 imposes a strict constraint on the conception of the nature of objects, and in particular on the interpretation of their status as substance of the world, the form that is common to all possible worlds. The independence of objects from the logical variation of the total configurations of reality is to be understood in a much more radical way than in the interpretive proposal examined above. Objects are to be conceived of as entities which, so to speak, are not touched by that variation. Only then they can play the semantic role of references, Bedeutungen, of names, within the picture theory of language, and in particular, only then they can ensure the fulfillment of the general semantic principle that the meaningfulness of a proposition cannot depend on the truth of some other proposition, famously TLP 2.0211. My simplified model enjoys that property. The passage from one possible total configuration of reality to another one, from one row of the table to another, leaves unaltered both objects and the logical space determined by their combinatorial potential. Now, I have other time available.
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so I want to show that there is a specific conjectural identification of objects that has the merit of meeting the constraint on the nature of objects imposed by section 2 2.013. This conjectural identification, it deals with the identification, the conjectural identification objects with phenomenal qualities, that is, repeatable aspects of phenomenal stream, that is, qualia in Nelson Goodman's sense. I want to show now, in the time that remains, that this conjectural identification fulfills the requirement of or meets the constraint on the nature of objects that is, in my reconstruction, that is imposed by section 2.013. Put in a nutshell, examples of objects are the phenomenal colors, the points or places of the visual field, the moments of phenomenal time, and other phenomenal qualities belonging to the other sensory fields, pitch, tone, hardness, warmth, etc. In particular, one phenomenal color can combine with one visual point and one moment of phenomenal time, and this kind of combination results in a minimal visual complex or state of affairs. In Goodman's terminology, it results in a color spot moment. When Wittgenstein says that color, space, and time are forms of objects, TLP 2.0251, he implies that objects divide into different formal categories, and he mentions some of them. The formal category of colors, which the phenomenal colors belong to, that of the visual points, space, that of the moments of phenomenal time. Every existing minimal complex, obtaining state of affairs, generated through the combination of objects of the appropriate categories forms, instantiates each one of the universals which are its components. More formally, the relation of being an instance is the restriction to existing minimal complexes of the converse relation of the relation of being a component of. Moreover, according to my interpretation, if a red spot moment exists, is not that the color red is in a certain visual place at a certain moment. It is the complex instead that has that spatial and temporal location, as well as the property of being read, by instantiating each one of its three components. I cannot articulate this conception of objects here, but you can find some arguments supporting it in some articles or books of mine, if you are interested in understanding the reasons why I put forward this conjecture, which identifies objects with qualia. But now the focus is on the consequences. The focus is on the fact that this interpretation of objects meets the constraint imposed by proposition 2, and to 013, and I won't conclude my paper by showing that it does, that conjecture meets that constraint. In the wake of Goodman, I will adopt the following characterization of the two pairs of metaphysical notions, universal particular on the one hand, and abstract concrete on the other. Universality is a matter of repeatability. An entity is a universal if it has a multiplicity of possible instances. Otherwise, that is, if it is unrepeatable, it is a particular. Concreteness is aptness to be perceived, and it is a matter of completeness. So universality is a matter of repeatability, and concreteness is a matter of completeness. A red spot moment enjoys the property of being concrete because it does not lack any of the three components that are needed to make an entity visually perceivable. Either red as such, or the combination of red with a moment of time, but with no visual place, or the combination of red with a place of the visual field, but with no temporal quale, that is the red as such. And these partial combinations, we can call them partial combinations, are abstract entities because they cannot be perceived due to their incompleteness. That is, one can perceive a color spot moment, but cannot perceive, for example, a red spot moment, but one cannot perceive the red, or cannot perceive the red, the complex constituted by the red and the logical play and the place of the visual field without a temporal, without a moment of time. Notice that on the basis of the preceding specifications, Tractatus objects are to be classified as abstract universals because perceptibly incomplete and repeatable. For instance, phenomenal red can be instantiated by different existing red spot moments with the same temporal component and the different spatial component, or by different existing red spot moments with the same spatial component and the different temporal component, whereas states of affairs or minimal complexes are to be classified as concrete particulars because first, they are perceptibly complete, and second, they are unrepeatable, one phenomenal time always being among their components. This very sketchy presentation is enough to verify that the constraint imposed on objects by section 2.013 is met. Let us consider phenomenal red, an object, according to my view. The space of states of affairs in which the phenomenal color red is placed is constituted by all possible visual states of affairs or minimal complexes, whose components are one visual point, one moment of phenomenal time, and the phenomenal red itself. That is, it is constituted by all possible red spot moments. To imagine that space as empty as is tantamount to imagining that at no moment of phenomenal time a red spot occurs in the visual field, or what is the same, that the phenomenal quality of red is never instantiated by an existing color spot moment, a sort of red blindness, so to speak. That configuration of the visual field in time can be safely imagined, irrespective of whether it is realized or not. Let us consider now a point L of the visual field. According to my interpretation, it is an object of a formal category different from that of phenomenal colors, of course. Each visual point can combine with one phenomenal color and one moment of phenomenal time And that kind of combination results in a color spot moment. Thus, the space of states of affairs where the point L is placed is formed by all possible color spot moments localized in point L, that is, by all possible visual minimal complexes whose components are the point L, one phenomenal color, and one moment of phenomenal time. Notice that it is here that the famous color exclusion problem arises in the following form. Two color spot moments with the same temporal and spatial components and a different color component cannot both exist, a logical impossibility, according to Wittgenstein. Tractatus 6.375.1. In my opinion, it is the awareness of the color exclusion problem that prompts Wittgenstein to mention Färbigkeit as an alternative to color, Farbe, as a form of objects in Tractatus 2.0251. But it would be too, it would take too time to explain this further conjecture concerning the interpretation of the German word Färbigkeit, which occurs as an alternative to Farbe in TLP 2.0251. Okay, what is important is that to imagine the space where the object L, that is a point in the visual field, as empty, to imagine that space as empty is tantamount to imagining that the point L is a permanent blind spot of the visual field, that is a point where a colored spot never occurs, even though, as a matter of fact, that configuration of the visual field does not realize in time, it is conceivable nonetheless, which amounts to admitting the thinkability of the emptiness of the space of states of affairs in which the point L is placed. Things are slightly more complicated with the moments of phenomenal time, another formal category of objects, according to my interpretive conjecture. Each moment of phenomenal time can combine not only with one phenomenal color and one visual point to generate color spot moments, but also with other phenomenal qualities belonging to the other sensory fields to generate minimal complexes or states of affairs that can exist in those fields: auditory complexes, tactile complexes, gustatory complexes, olfactory complexes. In short, every possible minimal sensory complex has one moment of phenomenal time among its components. By the way, this implies that everything that exists in time. Then, let T be a moment of phenomenal time. The space of states of affairs where T is placed is formed by all possible minimal complexes of all sensory fields, which T is a component of. That is, by all possible minimal sensory complexes temporally localized at the moment T. To imagine that space as empty is tantamount to imagining that at the moment T of phenomenal time, the whole stream of phenomena is interrupted. No sensory complex exists at T, even though, as a matter of fact, that configuration of phenomenal reality, the disappearance of the phenomenal world at T, does not realize, it is conceivable nonetheless, which amounts to admitting the thinkability of the emptiness of the space of states of affairs in which the moment T is placed. In conclusion, The picture of the Tractatus ontology that I have proposed can be further refined as follows. The notion of a possible momentary total configuration of the world, or the phenomenal world, can be defined in two steps. First, for one given, you can read on the slide, for any given moment of time t, let us isolate within the whole logical space all and only the states of affairs which t is a component of, the space of states of affairs in which t is placed. Let us distribute existence and non-existence over the elements of this subset of logical space. The elements of these subsets are homogeneous as far as their temporal component is concerned. And here I disregard the color exclusion problem, of course. So we have in two steps the definition of the notion of possible momentary total configuration of the world. First I isolate that subset of the logical space which is formed by all the states of affairs which have the temporal, the moment of time t as a component. So I isolate the subset of the logical space, which is constituted by all the states of affairs which t is a component of. And second, I distribute existence and non-existence over the elements of this subset of logical space. And for each distribution of existence and non-existence over the elements of the subset of logical space, I obtain a possible total configuration of reality at time t. Now, a fragment of a possible history of the phenomenal world from time t1 to time tn is then a finite sequence of momentary total configuration of the world, W1, W2, Wn, where for every I between 1 and n, Wi is one of the possible momentary total configuration of the phenomenal world at time ti. So if the world is identified with the totality of facts, as in TLP 1.1, and if the world is the phenomenal world, then the conclusion can be drawn that, quotation from TLP 6.41, the conclusion can be drawn that at that the world does not alter, but comes to an end. If Td is the time of death, the momentary total configuration of the phenomenal world at Td is not just changed with respect to its total configuration at the immediately preceding moment. At the moment Td, the time of death, there are no longer obtaining phenomenal states of affairs. That is, there are no phenomenal facts, and hence no phenomenal world at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Frascolla. I would request Professor R.C. Pradhan, the chairperson of the session, to share his reflections, and then we will proceed to the question and answer session.
Thank you, Abhishek. It is an excellent analysis of the notion of Tractarian object, and Professor Frascolla has answered the question that he had raised. Do Tractarian objects exist in all possible worlds? If I understand him correctly, in a negative way. that he believes that an empty space can be imagined, can be thought about. But the fact of the matter is that in his first part of his argument, he has shown that no object can exist in isolation, and objects are always in combination. So states of affairs are, as Wittgenstein himself mentions, are built into the form of the objects. That means the objects have to be always in combination. So if we think of an empty space, what does it mean? Does it mean that it has no object in it? If there is no object, then no state of affairs. But if there is an object, then states of affairs are possible. Now here we must make a distinction between obtaining and being possible. When we say a possible state of affairs doesn't obtain, we mean that it is possible and not actual. So no possible world will be without any combination or combinatorial possibilities. So a possible world is a possible combination of objects. So there is no question of a world or a possible world which can be empty in this logical sense of the term. That possible world may not be actual. In fact, there is only one actual world for Wittgenstein, but there are infinite possible worlds if we suppose that the objects are also infinite. There is no reason to say that they are finite in number. So in that case, the argument that there will be an empty space in which no state of affairs obtains is, in a sense, an absurdity. So when Wittgenstein is making the point at 2.013 that we can imagine an empty space, but I cannot imagine the thing without the space. So it is a reductio argument, really. He is suggesting that there can be no space, that is logical space, which can be empty. If somebody can argue that way, it will lead to absurdity. So it is a reductio ad absurdum argument. So he has also taken the example of space, physical space. So he says, just as we are quite unable to imagine spatial objects outside space or temporal objects outside time, so too, there is no object that we can imagine excluded from the possibility of combining with others. That is, he's giving an example from the notion of physical space. In physical space also, we cannot think of an object without space, but we can think of empty space. This was also Kant's argument. But from this, it doesn't follow that empty spaces are available in the logical sense of the term. It will be an absurdity. So that will be my first reflection on Professor Frascolla's analysis. As to the idea of a phenomenal world, to which he has referred in the last part of his lecture, how does a phenomenal world exist? It must be the actual combination of objects. So if by chance, because there is no direction from any divine authority, as in Leibniz, as to which world will be actualized, they remain all possible. Even the actual world is also possible. But it is by chance, by some arbitrary fate of occurrence, that this world, which is a possible world, is also actual. So in that sense, the phenomenal world is an arbitrary world, is an accidental world, in the sense that it obtains, this combination of objects obtains in this world. Now, when he refers to time, for example, how does time come into existence in Wittgenstein's Tractatian? Objects are all timeless and spaceless. then how does time enter into the scheme of things? Is time itself an object? Is space itself an object? That cannot be the case, because all objects are spaceless and timeless. If that is so, then we have to explain how time and space are possible in Wittgenstein's Tractatus. If the actual world really occurs, if the combination obtains, then in that case, time comes into being. That is, this obtaining itself, the obtaining of this combination, the actualization of the combination brings time into the focus. So in that sense, time is not an eternal reality for Wittgenstein. The only eternal objects are objects, or the things that he calls. So in that sense, eternity can be ascribed only to the objects and their possible combinations, but eternity cannot be ascribed to the actual combination of actual obtaining of a combination as in the phenomenal world. So we have to really be careful about understanding how time is possible in the Tractatus. I think time is, if we can use a Vedantic phrase, is in a sense unreal for the Tractatus, but it is real only from a phenomenal point of view. So time is phenomenally real, but not really metaphysically real. So in that sense, we must try to understand, and Professor Frascolla has really given us indication how to understand a phenomenal world. So we are all thankful to Professor Frascolla for this deep analysis of the Wittgensteinian notion of an object. In fact, this is one of the most crucial concepts in Wittgenstein, which has puzzled commentators across the board and across different commentarial literature. So in that sense, it is a great contribution of Professor Pasquale. And now I think questions will be invited. If Professor Pasquale wants to respond to me, you can do it, but you can also respond later on.
But,
thank you.
Thank you very much. I did not get your point on the interpretation of set of proposition 2.013. I did not get your point about the emptiness, the conceivability of the emptiness of the space where an object is placed. How do you think that one should construe this thinkability of the emptiness of the space where an object is placed? I did not get the point.
Yes, exactly what I meant is that empty space will be an absurd concept for Wittgenstein. We can imagine, but it doesn't really, it is a part of his argument to show that all spaces, that illogical spaces, are non-empty. So I was trying to make a fine distinction between obtaining and non-obtaining. You see, possible combinations are not the question of obtaining or not obtaining. Possible combinations are already there, eternally there, timelessly there.
Possible combination, possible
combinations of objects. But
possible
when you
combinations
say
of
they're
objects,
occurring, whether you mean they are actually happening, actualization also we have to understand between a possible world and an actual world. So that possible world may not be actual, so it may not be obtaining. But if you say obtaining means there will be no combination, I think that will not be acceptable to Wittgenstein. Because as he says, if I am to know the object, I need not know its external properties. There is another sentence. If all objects are given, then at the same time, all possible states are also given. So where is the question of our choice? Where is the question of obtaining, not obtaining? The combinations are eternally done, eternally there. So in that sense, the next follows that each thing is as it were in a space of possible state of affairs. the word agitware need not be taken literally. It must be must. Each thing must be in a space of possible state of affairs. That is my reading. Okay, so...
Yes, but I think that in Wittgenstein's conception, you cannot think of an object, he says, apart from the space where it is placed. He says thus, that you cannot think of an object apart from the space where it is placed. And the space where it is placed is the set of the states of affairs which it is a component of, where a state of affair is a possible combination of the object in question with other objects. So we know the object if we know the space where the object is placed. And this is the ontological correlate of the idea that we know the meaning of a name if we know the possibility, syntactical possibility of occurrence in prepositions. It's the same thing at the ontological level, but there is no difference, I think. And when you speak of the possibility for a name to occur in a proposition, you have the linguistic counterpart of the idea of the idea of the possibility of an object to occur in a state of affairs. And the state of affairs is a possible combination of objects. And each state of affairs either obtains or does not obtain. And if it does not obtain, a state of affairs can be conceived of as an empty logical place. I think that the metaphor should be unpacked in those terms. But
Okay.
if you accept this reading of the metaphor of the logical place, because logical place, the expression logical place is a metaphorical expression, of course, because it is modeled on the idea of a physical place. And as we speak of logic of physical places, but we can speak also of logical places metaphorically, and by logical place we mean a possible combinations of objects, that is the ontological correlate of a meaningful elementary proposition.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Let other
This
questions
is-
come.
Okay, I stop here, and but I am okay. If there are other questions,
Yeah, other questions.
Okay.
Dr. Batman had a question.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. I'm highly sympathetic to your account. In particular, the idea of applying some sort of contextualist principle on the level of ontology also, and there's a parallel on the propositional level. So this is some sort of a mirror image. So this is I find this idea highly interesting. So my question is, well, it's like two related questions regarding the implications of your account. So first, the traditional interpretation of the so-called argument for substance depends on the view that you reject, namely the view according to which necessary existence is existence in all possible worlds. So here my question is simply, what becomes of the argument for substance in your view, or how should we conceive of that, or should we like discard it, or so that's the first question, argument for substance, your thoughts on that. And second, relatedly, what are the implications of your view concerning the realism-idealism divide? regarding interpretations of the Tractatus. Do you think it's so? Does your view make Wittgenstein more like a realist, an idealist, or would you rather reject the whole framework? So these are my questions. Thanks again.
Thank you. Okay, for the first question about the argument from substance, the well-known argument what remains of this argument in my framework, interpretive framework. I think that my interpretation of substantiality of object is stronger than the interpretation which characterizes the substantiality in terms of necessary existence. The reasons why this attempt to characterize existence in terms substantiality in terms of necessary existence are based on the interpretation of 2.013, but I think that the point is that existence, that objects are beyond existence and non-existence, because existence can be predicated only of complexes. And in my view, complexes are identified with states of affairs. In it's a traditional Russellian idea of complexes, and I know that that each one of these theme would deserve a definitely more articulated reasoning, but I think that complexes, that if one accepts the identification of states of affairs with complexes, then one can say that a state of affairs obtains, but equivalently one can say that a complex exists, and existence is confined to complexes or states of affairs, and objects are beyond existence and non-existence, and this is the way in which I think can be saved the semantic general principle of the independence of the sense from the truth of any proposition. That is the famous semantic principle that governs an important part of Wittgenstein's thinking about the relation between sense and truth. And so I think that the argument from substance is strengthened by my interpretation. And as for the implications of my interpretation on the idealism and realism debate, it is not easy to answer your question, because in my view, the world which is spoken about in the first propositions of the Tractatus is the same word of which Wittgenstein says that it is my word, and that is the word of Vorstellung. I think that the identification of the world with life, or the proposition that I commented on which I make some comments at the end of my talk, that is a proposition that says in English that at death the world does not alter but disappears. Of course, Wittgenstein, I think that nobody could attribute to Wittgenstein the idea that the physical world disappears when he dies or when one of us dies. I think that the world that disappears is the world that is my world, that is the world of where the solipsistic world in the famous terms in which Wittgenstein speaks about it. This idea that Wittgenstein's solipsism is based on the identification of the world with my world, with life, and with the stream of phenomena, if you prefer. I think that has some implications on the idealism realism debate, in the sense that it seems that the Tractatus should be placed on the part of idealism, of course. If we mean this in the traditional sense of the opposition between idealism and realism. But I think that as you showed in your book, the terms in which the controversy between idealism and realism, if referred to the Tractatus, the terms should be different from the usual one. And I think that is a problem for my interpretation, to see how it can be accommodated in a framework in a general framework in which the controversy between idealism and realism is put in terms as you suggest in your book. It is an open question, I think so.
Thank you very much.
Professor Ghosh has a question. Yes, sir, please.
Thank you. I must congratulate Professor Frascolla for giving such a nice description of Tractatian object. Now, one thing is coming to my mind, that if objects are neither existence nor existence, we can define it in that way, then is it not a mystic way of handling the world, phenomenal world? This is one question, because Tractatus, as I believe, is more a philosophy in the garb of logic. And this is the first question. And the second question is, as it is also with reference to...
Sorry, I did not get the point of your first...
Okay, I'm repeating it.
Can you repeat
when we say that the object is neither... when we talk of an object, it is neither existence nor non-existence.
Yeah.
So when we say this, then is it not a mystic way of handling the phenomenal world? This is one thing.
It is not a
mystic way of handling the phenomenal world. Yeah, this is one question. And the second one is with reference to this was also coming to my mind. We have to bring in Leibniz definitely, because when we are talking about the possible world, so Leibniz, according to Leibniz, this world is the best possible world. So if that be the fact, then Wittgenstein, whether he is giving his version directly in contravention of Leibniz, that the world is what we make of it. So these two are the questions. Please, if you want to explain, it will be better. Thank you.
I will try to answer your two questions, but I am not sure that I will be able to do this, because first of all, the mystic, what's the relation between the mystic and the phenomenalistic conception of the world, if I understood correctly. I think that the mystic is the fact that the world exists, and what I not how the world is, but that it exists is, and what I try to do in presenting the idea that among the possible worlds or possible configurations of reality, there is a configuration in which no state of affairs obtains, means that as a corollary, that is important from the point of view of Wittgenstein mysticism. That is, if it is conceivable, a situation, if it is logically conceivable, a total configuration of reality in which no state of affairs obtains, since the world is identified with the totality of the obtaining states of affairs or facts, Wittgenstein, in my reconstruction, means that there are no logical reasons for the world to exist, because the conceivability of the emptiness of the whole logical space means that from a logical point of view, there is no necessity for the existence of the world. So we have a mystical attitude to the world, because, first of all, we cannot logically explain it or justify its existence. This is in my view, the most important connection between the conception of logical space I have attributed to Wittgenstein and the mystic and the idea, the mystical idea, or that part of Wittgenstein's mysticism that is focused on the idea that there is no reason for the world to exist. And so, and this is even in later writings, Wittgenstein mentions our attitude to the world and our and the amazing fact that the world exists, that it is one of the examples he often uses to illustrate the theme of the mysticism. And this is for the first question. And the second question was about the second question was about what point?
Was second question was in connection with Leibniz. You see, Leibniz, when he says that this world is the best possible of worlds,
Okay.
the best possible variety and is mixed here.
Okay.
So, is it not direct contravention with what Wittgenstein is giving us, or is or whether it is Wittgenstein is giving a new version of Leibniz? So this confusion is there, and Professor Pradhan was probably referring to that.
But I think that Wittgenstein was first of all, Wittgenstein does not introduce the notion of possible world. It is me who used Leibniz notion to illustrate some ideas of Wittgenstein, and I think that, but it has nothing to do with the metaphysical idea that our world is the best world among the possible worlds. Of course, it is only the logical import of the notion of a possible world that I think can be identified with the notion of possible total configuration of reality in terms of distribution over the logical space that is the totality of states of affairs of existence and non-existence. I think that this idea can be used fruitfully in accounting for some of Wittgenstein's ideas in the Tractatus, and first of all, to account for the notion of substantiality of objects, first of all, because I think that to conceive of substantiality, or construing substantiality in terms of necessary existence, and the necessary existence as existence in all possible worlds, is a natural train of thoughts that can be usefully scrutinized, even though I do it in a critical attitude. This is my point.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you to you. Okay.
Do we have any more questions? Yes, Vikrant, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Thank you, Professor, for a very enlightening talk, and it's definitely molto difficile. I find it very hard, but let me try to find a question.
It's my fault. It's my fault. Colpa mia in Italian.
No, sir. It is mine. Definitely mine. All fault is mine. So I have written it here just to be clear. So if an object is identified by the set of state of affairs of which it is a component, then from the conclusion that no substance is part of all possible state of affairs. So that is the conclusion, because an object is always a component of a state of affairs. So when all this of an object which exists in at least two possible state of affairs, I forgot, state. So an object is a component with a multiple parts in a state of affairs, because it is always in conjunction
with... I don't hear well. Can you speak aloud?
So object is always a component in conjunction with other objects in a state of affairs. Because there has to be at least two objects, minimum of two objects in a state of affairs.
Yes.
And so due to the impossibility of a single object obtaining in a state of affairs alone, should there be minimum two state of affairs of which an object is composed or component of, because this is a minimum criteria that every object has to be belong to a state of affairs. If there is another object also, there is no single
Yes.
object which is
Yes.
a component. Is it a assumption, or is it there is a proof of this?
No, I think that there is no proof, but it is a typical assumption of the logical atomism. You have the simple parts which constitute all possible worlds, because all possible worlds are constituted starting from one set of objects that is fixed, stable, and it is part of logical atomism to conceive of facts as obtaining combination of objects. It's the same with the ancient atomism. There is no difference from this point of view between logical atomism and Democritus atomism. You have the atoms that which combine and form complexes, and of course you need two objects at least to form a state of affairs, as you can and this I think is there is no proof of this, but I think that it is an assumption that is not explicitly discussed, but I think that is it is unavoidable that if you conceive of the world as the totality of facts, and a fact is a combination of objects, plural, that obtains, because the definition of fact is an obtaining state of affairs. So you have we cannot speak of existence of objects, but in the domain of objects there are at least two objects to form at least one state of affairs. I think that this is maybe a too simple model of the ontology, because I think that if you, when Wittgenstein says that color, space, and time are forms of objects, and in my interpretation, he means that there are at least three categories, formal categories of objects. That is, the large category of objects divides into at least three subcategories: that of color, that of space, that of time. And I construe this proposition, the Tractatus, in the terms of in these terms, that according to the formal property of objects belong to different categories. And this is another argument to supporting the idea that there are many objects, because colors, in my interpretation, objects do not have colors. Objects are colors. So if color is a category of objects, we can say that red, blue, yellow, and so on are objects of the category colors. And so you have a multiplicity of objects only under the category of colors. But if you say that space is a color, is a category of objects, you mean, in my interpretation, you mean points of the visual field. Of course, you have a multiplicity of objects of that category and so on. And this is so even though there is no explicit argument supporting the thesis that there is more than one object, I think that implicitly there are this assumption holds because it is implied by other statements explicitly made by Wittgenstein in the Tractatus.
Grazie, Professor.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions?
Hello.
Hello.
If objects form the substance of the world, how will you relate your notion of going beyond existence and non-existence to the notion of objects in Tractatus?
In my conception, existence is confined to complexes. And this is a thesis related to the semantic role that objects play. Because objects are, first of all, from a semantic point of view, they play the role of Bedeutungen of names. And their being beyond existence and non-existence is a property or a characteristic of objects that is rooted in the semantic role that they play, and it is the condition that allows that makes possible that independence of sense from the truth of propositions that is explicitly stated by Wittgenstein in a famous proposition of the Tractatus, that is that we understand a proposition without we understand the proposition, an elementary proposition, a proposition in general. To understand the proposition, we don't need to investigate the actual configuration, the empirical configuration of the world. What we understand is and the status of objects as the substance of the world ensures the possibility that we can understand the proposition without a previous investigation on the actual empirical configuration of the world. That is one of the that is another way of saying that sense does not depend from the truth of a proposition. It is, I think that it is the deepest reason to put objects beyond existence and non-existence, and to confine existence to complexes, where existence is another way of saying obtaining of a state of affairs, existence of a complex, or obtaining of a state of affairs, in my reading of the Tractatus, are the same. Okay. Okay, I think that I have to go now because in Italy, I don't know if there are other questions because.
I think there are no more questions. I would just request Ankita to give a vote of thanks on behalf of the forum, and then we will conclude this session.
Pardon?
Good evening.
Good
On
evening.
behalf of, yes, Professor, would you like to say something? Okay. Good evening. On behalf of the Forum for Philosophy, I would like to thank Professor Frascolla for his interesting and engaging talk on Tractarian objects. I would also like to thank the chairperson of this session, Professor Pradhan, for his comments and suggestions. I express my gratitude to Professor Panda for making this lecture series possible. Thank you to all our audience members, professors, researchers, and colleagues for their participation in today's discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your kind attention and for your questions and for the time you devoted to hear my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Frascolla.
Thank you. Bye-bye.